Hello and welcome to another edition of Kayak Fishing Weekly. I'm your host, Justin Largen, and we're the show on the Serious Angler Network that's dedicated to all things kayak fishing. Got a fun show planned tonight. Going to talk some pre-spawn fishing with somebody who is better at it than I am. I got a chance to get out on the water today, so well, I guess you guys can't smell me, but I hopefully I don't look too dirty and nasty. But yeah, got out and fished for a little bit and did not do so great. So I'm gonna be looking to our guests for some tips to help me do a little better next time. Um, Not a ton happening in the kayaking world this week. No major tournaments, and I didn't see anything too crazy in the world of news. The biggest thing is the Bassmaster Kayak Series Championship coming up on Lake Fork. At the time that this recording drops, we'll have about a week, I think a week and a half, something like that. But that tournament is coming up quick. Um, I am still bummed that I will not be there. But our very own Bailey Egbert is going to be down there along with a lot of other folks that did qualify. So we're definitely going to be rooting on Bailey, hoping to see him do well down there. And it should be a fun tournament. If I were down there, it would, with the time of year, I expect water temps will be right for some spawning fish, and that's what I would spend most of my time doing. Not sure what if that'll actually play, but I know if I was there, that is what I'd be doing. But before I get too far down a rabbit hole, um, shoot, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. Let's get to our guest tonight. I am joined by Mr. Jordan Westerman. Jordan, thanks for coming on.
No problem. No problem. Thank you for having me.
And dude, you're a kayaking hammer. I know you've got at least the one national win because I saw you win up on Cayuga last year. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
Um, and I appreciate you agreeing to talk some pre-spawn fishing. And I'm thinking first, we'll kind of define it. For me, pre-spawn can be kind of a big window, but I'm thinking, pre-spawn before the spawn, but there's a lot that can fall into that. Everything from kind of late winter where we're talking really cold water to what we're starting to get to here in Virginia. I feel like we're right on the verge of that 50-degree water and getting to where those fish start to come a little bit shallower. But when you hear pre-spawn, what are you thinking, Jordan?
Usually it's kind of dependent on region. I grew up in the ice belt, so our lakes froze over.
Right.
And then those fish are a completely different animal, obviously, but they're a completely different animal by how they set up, how they do everything. A lot of the northern fish, I believe, move up under the ice. They'll move up shallow. And then your southern fish are completely different. So kind of it all depends on that area of where you're at in the country. Like I was saying with the northern fish, especially the ones under the ice, I used to ice fish a lot, and I would um I'd sight fish in the shallows for crappies when it got really late ice, and it was warm days, and you'd see a lot of the largemouth up in that less than 3 foot of water cruising those flats under the ice. So I think for us up north, like those fish will definitely move up really quick, and that pre-spawn pattern, I feel like the second the ice is out is when the pre-spawn starts. So water temp doesn't necessarily matter there because it warms up so quick. Where down south, I'm in Texas now, we've had 50 to 55-degree water temperatures for almost a month now. So your pre-spawn period is just really dragged out, and you get cold fronts that continue to really drag that out more and more. Um,
Dude, that is cool. I never even like I've never I take it back. I've been to the Midwest. I don't think well, I guess if you count the Mississippi River, I've fished out there a little bit, but not much. That's crazy to me that you can actually see the fish under the ice. That never occurred to me as being a thing.
yeah. I really like that fishing really shallow flats, and you just set up on a hole, and close to some type of structure, and just let those fish come to you. And I found that a lot of those times I'd get some really big crappie up shallow, but there was a lot of the largemouth that would come cruising, underneath my hole, or I could see them on the camera, and they they get up in those warm areas and just kind of stay up there. The water doesn't it fluctuates as far as it gets warm, I believe, but it doesn't cool down enough that it sends them running. So they just kind of sit up there. Same with the bait, the perch, the crappie, the all that stuff will go up in the shallows in the north also. So they just kind of follow that and sit up and eat them.
That's cool. Now, is there a lot of grass in those Midwest type lakes, or
Yeah,
is it more?
we have a lot of grass. Um, in Iowa where I'm at, it's not quite as healthy as, like, say, the upper Minnesota, Wisconsin, kind of those areas. That we have more field runoff, so our lakes do get a little dirtier. Um, some of the lakes in the northern part of the state get fairly clean. They've got some zebra mussels. Pretty much any lake in Iowa that's got zebra mussels has a fairly good grass, has a lot of grass. Now we're not talking like hydrilla, it's more like eelgrass, pondweed, stuff like that. But yeah, it is grass, but a lot of that grass does die off. Or I think it's the pondweed. There's one of them that starts growing right before ice out. So it'll start growing. So if you can get in around that fresh grass, that's where a lot of those fish are moving up into.
Dude, so there's enough light penetration even through the ice that the grass is actually starting to grow.
hmm As long as there's
Dude,
not,
that's cool.
as long as there's not snow on the ice, um, yeah, the grass will grow. It's when we get like heavy patches of snow on the ice, that's when we get fish kills. We don't get the grass to grow, which then means they don't get the oxygen, as far as I know. But yeah, anytime that there's the snow on the ice is when things go bad. But if we get years where there's not a ton of snow on the ice, or it melts off, then yeah, that grass will really start growing as everything progresses.
That's
You
cool.
know, because there's a long period of time where from for like rotten ice that you can't walk on until like getting the whole lake open. You've got it'll slowly patch open depending on the wind. You get a big windy day, it'll open up more, but there's a decent amount of time, a month or so, where not necessarily you can't get on the water, but you can't ice fish on the ice.
Gotcha. That was something else I never really thought about was the amount of time that it would take for I guess the thick ice to break up and go from what is it like what's this I've never ice fished. What's like the safe thickness to where you can actually get out there and walk on it?
So anything over 3 inches,
Okay.
depending on, like I wouldn't go out in less than 3 inches. Um, and then by the end of the season, most of it's like 10 to 20 inches of ice. But the problem is then it will start to like go rotten or honeycomb. The water, you'll get water on top of the ice, and that water will make like a honeycomb through the ice. And then it just gets really really rotten and soft, and you really got to kind of watch where you're going or watch what you're doing.
That's fascinating to me. Where I'm in Virginia and it I don't know, I mean, it takes roughly maybe 4 hours, like, from the northernmost part of the state to the south, so there's not a ton of difference, um, but, like, this year, I'm a little further south now. I used to be in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC, and it used to be more common that we'd get some of the little small lakes freezing over there, but it was never you'd have signs everywhere, "Don't walk out on the ice." I mean, it would freeze up enough to where you couldn't fish, like, you couldn't get a bait through the ice, but never enough to where you could actually get out there and safely chase them. And it's even I guess it's even it's a little bit warmer further south, but even still, like, this year was so cold. we've had a bunch of the small lakes freeze over. Um, I'd never seen some of these little backwater coves on Smith Mountain Lake freeze, but they definitely did this year with the temps and the winter the way it was. It it was brutal.
Mhm.
Was
Yeah,
it tough for?
it doesn't take a lot for it to freeze up. That's for sure. I we had a tournament on Palestine a few weeks ago in Texas, and the back bays were even froze up. We were breaking ice in areas to launch, and uh, it was cold, and it doesn't get
Dude.
like that usually down here.
All right, so walk me through. I guess we'll start with like a one of those northern type lakes. The ice is off. The water temps are climbing. It's pre-spawn. How are you starting to attack these lakes? What are you looking for?
For two things that I look for the most are kind of those old dead pad stems and rock. Either one of those, something that's going to really hold that heat. Um, the rock seems like it's always a big player in the north. You know, especially like any kind of bridge causeway or we get a lot of like fishing jetties that are all just perfect riprap. It'll be a jetty that comes out, say, 100 yards, and it's all riprap out around it. And so that stuff, I feel like anytime after ice out is a huge player in the north. Those old pad stems are another thing. You can really just fish shallow in those pad stems and usually come across some bigger fish because they're holding up in those big clumps or in the root systems and just really just kind of laying in there and absorbing heat. um, and then I haven't got to do it much, but I'm sure that there is, an offshore minnow bite somewhere. I just don't get to spend enough time in that really early pre-spawn or that early ice out time. Um, I think if you could get around some of those fish while they're still grouped up a little bit offshore, because there is that split. You get a lot of those fish that move up shallow, but there's still a lot of fish that just kind of sit out in deep and just do that whole deal until they move up. The only time I believe they move up is just to do their deed, and then they move right back offshore. Where up north we got a lot of those fish that just live up shallow, but there still is that split of both of them.
That's cool. It's amazing. Like I'm no forward facing aficionado. Like I don't even have it. Never used it. I've got a chance to fish with guys. Kind of watch them before, but it's cool just what I'm hearing and watching with other anglers, like what we can actually see those sort of offshore pelagic fish. I remember I used growing up, I thought bass just they live on the bank, they pull off a little bit deeper in the winter, but they're always, you have to have some kind of structure. Like the idea that there's just fish out there roaming around chasing bait is it's a relatively new concept to me anyway.
Yeah, like I've been in Texas all of February, and at least the last 2 weeks, I have not launched my boat and fished anything other than just like roamers and bait. I have given up the bank completely. It's like it's not. I'm trying to invest every second of my time into figuring out that offshore scope and bite, and um, it blows my mind the amount of fish that are just out cruising. They're sitting. I can go almost every day catch 15 to 30 fish pretty, I don't want to say easily because I've invested a ton of time, but you can come across 15 to 30 bites pretty quick and pretty easy on a lot of these at least these Texas lakes.
Is there any rhyme or reason to the actual, like, is there a pattern that you take to try to get out and look for those roamers? Or is it just a point the kayak in a line and kinda go look?
It all depends on the lake size. Obviously if you're on Toledo Bend, a Rayburn, Fork, some of these bigger lakes, you're gonna want to spend more of your time on those key areas, the points, the secondary points, the humps, but a lot of what I'm finding, like those fish don't necessarily need that as much as they want to be around some type of bait. and they use that bait as structure just as much as they use the structure as structure. Um, like I said, a lot of my biggest fish lately have not came off of anything. I literally am just cruising around areas. They're not on bait. They're cruising in the top 3 to 4 foot of the water column and just sitting high up in the water. And I don't know, why they're up there or what they're doing. One of my buddies just keeps saying they like to live shallow. It doesn't matter where on the lake they are. They just want to be shallow. But
Ah,
I think it's more kind of time of the year, they're sitting up in that, trying to sun a little bit. But yeah, I
you,
don't, there is some rhyme or reason certain times of the year, but I think at the same time, some of them fish are just out floating everywhere.
you think this time of year that they're trying to what, like, is incubate the right word? They're trying to heat the eggs, the big
You know,
females, or
I've heard them doing that and like setting up in the shallows, but I think right now they're just kind of sunning a little bit because even today, like it was overcast and raining, and I was having trouble getting like catching some of these fish because they were less than a foot underneath the water or underneath the top of the water. So just presenting a bait to those fish is super hard. And I don't, so like it wasn't sunny, so they're not up there sunning today. I think that they're up there. If they want to chase bait, they know that it's an easy drop down. The crappie will sit below the bait. The bass just seemed like, for me lately, they've all been up in that water column, and just no rhyme or reason floating around. Um,
that's
but
fascinating to
those
me.
have been on a little bit smaller lakes, um,
Okay.
that I've been on lately.
That forward facing game, I'm gonna eventually get it and have to learn it. But to me, that's so scary. Like just from a tournament standpoint, like you can what I normally do, just beat in the bank. You know, if I had the skill with forward facing, like knowing that I could just get out off the bank, like it wouldn't matter. You go to a ramp and I get flustered. There's 20 or 30 people there, and you got a crowd. There's only so many laydowns and docks and everything along the bank. But to have the ability to go out and actually and the skill to actually present a bait and and catch them out kind of roaming, I feel like that would it would make for a very scary tournament angler.
Yeah, yep. And that's where I feel like in kayak fishing, we don't have a lot of people that are confident and focus on that. Like I know me, like last year, a year before, I would use my live scope, but I used my live scope a lot for not necessarily finding fish as much as like finding structure, finding isolated grass, finding, oh man, that point that has grass on it, that point goes out to 18 foot. Well, the grass tops out at 9. And right here's the sweet spot where I can see that, like I can hit that with a trap. Like that was what I did a lot. And now it's like, man, it, at least when the water's cold and they're focus more on bait, like just launch your boat and go looking for them. And if you, on a tournament day, if you can come across 5 fish, it's almost like the scoping deal is like the smallmouth deal. If you, with smallmouth, if you trust yourself and you are a confident and a decent smallmouth angler, you only need 5 minutes to get right, and you can get right real good. But you need to have the patience to not give up on those fish. You always hear people saying, "Oh, my smallmouth left me." No, you didn't go searching for them. Smallmouth are always going to move. They're not just sitting on a point waiting for you to come. Like you got to go find those fish. And I feel like the same thing with largemouth on the scope when they're roaming. It's like trust the process, put yourself in an area where there's bait, where there are should be fish, and just go figure them out. And then it's what type of bait are they on? What size of minnow do they want to eat? How fast do they want it coming to them?
Dude, that is good stuff. I'm yeah, the forward facing thing, it fascinates me. But the point that you made about the smallmouth specifically, I've heard that so many times from guys, like what was it last year? The Bassmaster Championship. Um, why am I blanking on the name of the lake? 10 killer.
10 killer. Yeah.
Was on 10 killer. And I heard that from so many guys. Yeah, I found these smallmouth, but then they were gone when the tournament started. And you're saying, hey, you just because they're not on, whatever the hump or the point or wherever you found them before, they're somewhere. Go find them.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to really trust that process and trust your experience there. Cause if you don't have the experience of like spending days looking for them, yeah, it's tough. But it's like once you've spent enough time, getting your butt kicked by a smallmouth, it's like, well, they aren't here. Are they here? Are they? And they're not. If they're not here and they're not here and they're not in between, go somewhere else and figure something else out. Don't try to, like have a backup plan with the smallmouth, but like I always look at if there's smallmouth in the Derby, I'm not my backup plan is never going for largemouth. If there are winning smallmouth on a body of water, that's how you win because you can get right so quick. And I feel like it's so much harder to do that sometimes with largemouth, especially largemouth in a shallow water. Um, the other thing I watched I think it was a Dustin Connell video a while back where he was talking about how that shallow water bite progresses through the week of a tournament week, and it's like everybody's first day of practice they're on that shallow water bite, but the second day all of those laydowns got hit, all those docks got fished. You're trying to fish the same recycled stuff even if you're not doing it, where if you can find them offshore somewhere, those are way more untapped, especially in a kayak. I've tried more and more to really stay away from the bank, and go find those little gems offshore because, again, that's where you can get right the quickest. That's where you don't have to deal with other people usually in a tournament. And if you do, if there's somebody else on that spot, usually there's enough fish for both. If you're both trying to fish like a couple isolated pieces of grass or isolated patches of grass on a point, that doesn't work out so well when there's two or three people there. But if you're out fishing a gravel
No.
bar, on a hump and nobody else is around and there's two people and it's a half a mile gravel bar, that's a completely different story.
Yeah, plenty of water. Yeah, dude, you're making the case for me getting away from the bank and spending the money and getting the live scope because it makes so much sense to like everybody knows how to do. At least I feel like in the kayak world, everybody knows how to go beat the bank, and especially with we have the ability to practice for a week for a lot of these tournaments. So even if you see maybe a couple of guys at your ramp on tournament day, who knows how many guys practiced there, went through and beat that stuff up throughout the week. It's a lot of pressure versus I feel like if I had the ability to go out offshore, like you said, I like the idea of finding a group of fish or finding some, Bailey does it all the time. He has his little rock piles where he'll go and, catch a bunch of fish off the rock pile. Like that style is it's not something that I've done or I'm good at, but I really want to learn it.
Yeah. And that's one, like, why I've been spending so much time doing it, because you have to spend time doing it so that you're confident at what you're looking at. I know before I had live scope, I had such a hard time like having confidence in my side scan to the point where I could be like, that is a tree over there or a rock pile. I'd look at it and be like, that's probably, or man, did I just roll over a bunch of fish? I'm pretty sure it was, but am I wasting my time? Now it's like I side scan it, I see it, I shine it with my scope, and I'm like, oh yeah, look, there's the tree, there's the rock pile, and that makes it so now I don't have to necessarily do that as much. Where I can just cruise past, and I'm able to make my side scan make more sense by putting the visual of it this way, not just this way. Um, so that in the long run saves me more time, because I am confident that what I saw, and I can be like, oh well, the last lake I was at, it looked like this, and that hump had this and this, stuff like that. You can find that spot on the spot a lot easier when you have confidence in your equipment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I want to talk baits for a minute. You mentioned minnows and playing around with different sizes, and I think you said rates of fall. Um, are you pretty much throwing some style of minnow bait whenever you're offshore chasing those roamers with the scope?
Sorry, you cut out there.
Oh, sorry. Um, I was asking if that minnow, some form of minnow is your primary weapon when you're out there targeting those Roman fish with the scope, or do you mix it up with some other things?
Um, you know, Jerk bait, minnows. When I'm doing that roamer deal, it seems like those, throwing an A rig, throwing a glide bait, and throwing a big swimmer. But the minnow is usually just, it's the easiest to cover water with, and just put it in front of fish over and over and over again. And if they don't react, then I start working my way down. Do they, if they're not eating a 4 or 5 inch minnow, then I'll jump up to a 7. If they're not eating that, then it's either, can I access them with a jerk bait? If I can't access them with a jerk bait, then it's an A rig, or a big swimmer. And then, depending on how they react to that, then it's either, then you can add that glide bait. I've had days where I can put a 3 to 4 inch minnow in their nose, and they don't do anything. I can literally almost bounce it off their heads and they won't move. Or I'll throw that 3 inch, 4 inch minnow, and it hits the water and they swim to the bottom and they're 10 feet away from it. Where I throw a glide bait out there, a 9, 10 inch glide, or a 9 inch glide bait, it splashes and those fish turn, and you can tell that they're looking at it. And then you do like, 2 pops, and they charge up to it, and they might not eat it, but you get that reaction out of them to where A, that it's a bass. And then B, you can be like, check down to, I need to, go to a slower swimming, or slow my glide down. I need to go to a big swimmer, a big soft swimmer, stuff like that, where you can't, I don't think the, like, going out and doing that is just like one bait. You have to really check through a lot of baits. And every day is different. We were out on a lake last week where it was like, we showed up and literally caught every single fish we saw. Probably were over 30 a piece. The Just stupid. And I went out there a day or two later and I caught like a quarter of the amount of fish I threw at these fish, and they'd swim away from it. Where the other day it was like it hit the water and they'd come charging up at it. So, and conditions weren't that much different. So it's like every day is a different deal. You see that with smallmouth too. Like, some days they're just charging up at baits, and some days you can't get anything near them. They're just going to get away from you.
I feel like that's what happens to me most of the time.
Me too.
They s- they don't want to play. Every once in a while, I get that magical day, but I want to backtrack a little bit and go back to those northern lakes and talk baits for those scenarios. Uh, you were talking about the rock piles or the jetties, and then the pad stems. Um, what do you like to pick those apart with?
So any of the rock pile stuff, that's usually a square bill, flat side, or like a DT6. Any of that crank, I really like to crank that rock, or drag a jig. Cranking or a jig is really really good. I feel like a jig usually gets some really good bites. If there is any wind on that at all, I'll throw a mag draft, or some type of soft swimmer. Usually in that time of the year, I really like that mag draft, whether it's the freestyle or the harness. For me, that really just depends on depth. If I want to keep it down below 3 foot, I'll throw the freestyle version. And if I want to keep it up higher, I'll throw that harness.
Okay. And are you using like a weedless style setup on that the freestyle one,
Yep,
or are
yep,
you going
yeah.
jig head?
I throw the trocar. I like that trocar hook. It's a little bit smaller profile. Or I will throw the flashy swimmer. I don't throw the beast on them. I like the smaller hook profile. I feel like a beast or a 6/0, some of those 6/0 hooks just hang so far below. Oh, I don't have any around here. They hang so far below that I don't like the way it looks. Where if you go with a flashy swimmer, um, it just sits in that bait a lot better. And the other thing is with the flashy swimmer, the the beast, say if the let's see if I got it. Oh, sorry. Uh, I got a so this is a mag draft, but like the beast, your weight is right here, like that. If you do that
Gotcha.
flashy swimmer, the weight is up more in the head. So I feel like you get more drop down. And if you pop it, you can make that bait, kind of dart side to side a little bit more. Um, so yeah, I really like that that flashy swimmer or the trocar, depending on the weight. The trocar, I believe, is an 1/8 ounce, and the flashy swimmer is a 3/8 ounce. So again, depending on water depth, um, those are kind of the couple options that I do.
Cool. I'm curious with the crankbait. The are you a big believer in red in the springtime?
Yes, yes, definitely. Especially in Texas, East Texas, especially, like red is about the only color that I throw. I probably have, yeah, I have boxes just that are just red crankbaits. Um,
Nice.
so yeah, if it's like, below 50 degrees, I do that flat. I like a red flat side. 50 to 55 is when I kind of go flat side, maybe into DT6 or a square bill. And then anything over 55, when they start to get a little more active, then I'm just throwing that square bill. Um, and it's usually like I try to do balsa as much as possible in the spring, just to get
Ah,
that little bit of back out. My square bills. I do that Black Label. I really like their little. I think it's the Rec, and then the that Rapala OG is a really good little square bill, and then the other two are like the Fritz side and the Chick Magnet. I catch a lot of those on those two
chick
also.
magnet. Okay.
Yep. I really like those are two plastic baits that really fish similar to a balsa. Um, they'll rise up really good, so you've got that back itself out of cover. They cast a little bit. Both of those baits cast a little bit better than a balsa flat side. Sometimes those little balsa flat sides just they cast like a potato chip. They're very hard to cast on casting gear.
No fun in the wind.
Yeah, yep.
Gotcha. Um, well, shoot. I wanted to. I guess if you're in Texas, I'm trying to remember which tournaments. I know there's been a couple tournaments down on Rayburn, um, and I can't keep track of which trail and which series, but I feel like that scope has been pretty much how everything is won down there. At least what I'm seeing in the headlines.
Uh,
It's
yeah, and in regular derbs or boat derbs for sure. But like, we had that tournament on Rayburn last year. I'm trying to think out of the top 10, like I know out of the top five, four out of the top five didn't even have it on their boat, if I
mm,
remember right. I know, um, yeah, I know Philip didn't have it on his boat when he won it. I think G got second. He didn't have it on his boat. A couple other guys in that top 10 didn't like don't even own it. I think I got fifth in that tournament, and I think I was the only one that was scoping. But I was scoping, not necessarily watching fish, but I was able to find these like car-sized isolated patches of grass, and I could make that precise cast with a crankbait and get my bait in, watch my bait dive down into it, and then rip it out, and I'd see the fish coming out after it out of the grass. So that's how almost all of my bites came. Not traditional scoping where I'm out there shaking minnows or seeing fish. It was power fishing with scope while using my scope to make sure that I'm making the correct cast.
Gotcha. Dude, that's dialed in. Um, Dude, I had a question and I've completely forgotten it now. I know what it was. I wanted to shift a little bit because we were talking offline, and you talked about chasing the spawn. And I know that that's something you'd hear the Bassmaster Elite Series guys talk about, and I know for several years they would set tournaments up specifically to do that. Where they'd have whatever 4 or 5 tournaments in the spring, and they'd start in Florida and gradually work their way up and kind of chase the spawn. But you get to do that. Um, you were saying it, and you like starting this time of year. You're in Texas, and it's still pre-spawn down there for the most part, right?
Yeah, there some of the lakes fish are starting to move up. So there are some fish. I know a couple of lakes last week that had fish on bed. So they're there. They're getting there. It'll be right here any day now.
Okay, that's kind of what I hate that I didn't qualify for the Bassmaster Kayak Series on Fork this year, but
I
that
I I didn't either, and I am like cry every day about it.
I had an opportunity. I fished 2 tournaments. I did crappy in both of them anyway. And I had an opportunity to do a third, and I opted to do a different series, and I was, yeah, very much kicking myself afterwards. But God, Fork is awesome. I've been a handful of times. 22 was when I guess 22 and 23, I did a bunch of tournaments. I traveled a lot for Hobie and bass, and anytime I got close to Texas, like we did an Oklahoma tournament, I was like, all right, I'm gonna go south and go fish Fork for a couple of days,
Yeah,
just a fun fish. It's so much fun, and
yeah, it's a great lake.
the tournament that I did well in down there was, I mean, it was just a 1 day, but it was sight fishing was what I was doing, and it was a little earlier in the year. I think I've just happened to find one of the creeks that was dirtier water, and the fish were moving up first into that one, and I don't think it was on everybody's radar yet, but yeah, I would love to be down there sight fishing. But do you do that at all? Is that part of your game, the sight fishing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say like sight fishing's my biggest strength. That's what I do the most. Like last year, I started sight fish in January in Florida, and moved to Texas. We were pretty much on bed like mid February on. I caught I love to like get into that me versus the fish bed fishing. It's like and largemouth and
Yes.
smallmouth are completely different. I love to find smallmouth. I don't necessarily like to catch them off of beds. It is what it is. It's a if you're a tournament angler, you have to do it. Some derbs you have to do it. Like at Cayuga, you couldn't have went and found a lot of those smallmouth offshore. Um, they were up in on the bed, and they're if you can catch them or if you can find them, they're usually easier to catch. Um, and the largemouth is more like just making them. I love to make that fish eat. Where like I said with smallmouth, I love to find them, and how each one, is set is completely different on where they spawn and how they spawn and what they do. Um, that that's what I like the most about it is trying to figure out that stuff. Like the smallmouth, they spend so much more time on bed. A male
Hmm.
smallmouth could be up there for 2 weeks, where a big female largemouth might only pull up onto the bed for a few hours and then pull off. And some of those, I had 119 or 120.5 inch. I'm pretty sure it is, obviously probably was a male smallmouth on my home lake that I caught on the same bed 2 full weeks apart from each other. And I caught it in the middle. Like I caught it on a Monday, I caught it the next Monday, and I caught it the next Monday. And you can just see the progression of the fish just getting smaller, uh, just getting, thinner from just being up on bed. Um, and that's what I really like about it. It's like I feel like if I find smallmouth on bed during a tournament week, like I can read the stage that they're at and I know that they're going to be there for me. Where a largemouth, it's like you might find it on a Thursday, and there's a really good chance it's not there on Saturday.
Yep.
There's a good chance it's not there at the end of the day. But the smallmouth seem like they're a little more reliable during the spawn. Um, but it obviously all depends on weather and everything. But I feel like they don't pull off as easily as the largemouth do.
Dude, you are speaking my language. I'm not as familiar with the smallmouth. We've at least with sight fishing for them. I've done it a little bit in the rivers, um, not a ton. And then we've got Smith Mountain Lake near here has got pretty good smallmouth population. Nothing like those northern fish, but they get to five, and you'll hear guys catch a six every once in a while. And I've sight fished for those before, but yeah, God, I love it. I love like you were saying, just the you versus the fish, and I've had my best tournament finishes, you know, basically doing some variation of sight fishing, either catch them on beds or cruising, fry garters like that. That's where I've done my best. But I've also had some absolute train wreck finishes where you well, I find a fish and I'm like, I'm going to catch that fish, and I spend way too much time on it. And then you pop into a pocket where there were several good fish, and now they're every single one of them's gone. Uh, I'll never forget that one of the tournaments I fished on Harris chain. I think this was 22, and it was probably a 30-pound stringer that I was looking at. I stuck one, and it was 23 and change and seven. And I shook a couple other ones off earlier in the day and went back to them. I'm like, man, those are every big as the one that, that I stuck. And yeah, 2 days later, not a one of them was there. They were
Oh, yep. They just
all gone.
it's wild how they leave like that. And the other thing is sometimes largemouth, like if you stick a largemouth on a Thursday, I've had it where I stuck a largemouth on a Thursday just because I was, trying to figure out sizing. And on Saturday, if I came within 50 yards of it, it'd swim away from the bed. And I never got a pitch to that fish during the tournament because I stuck it on um, Thursday. And on the other end of the spectrum with smallmouth, like I know we had a derby in Okoboji, the Iowa Great Lakes this year, where I told my friends, I was like, look, I'm like, what do you guys think it's going to take to win? They're like, oh, I don't know, 85 to 87 a day. And I'm like, look, guys, I caught 97 inches today of the fish that I flipped at. All of those fish are on bed and are going to eat tomorrow. I have 97 inches.
I'm going to beat
Like
you by 10 inches.
no questions asked. And and it came and that was when All American was doing the best 10 fish. Um, it was a day and a half tournament, and you could catch all 10 fish in one day. Well, I had like two high 90 stringers. I had the two highest stringers of the tournament because I knew what I was fishing for and I knew what I was looking at. And I could pull up and just look at my waypoints and be like 19 and a half, 19 and a half, 20. Okay, so I can bang those. I can get this 19 here and this 19 here. And then when I would, be done with them, then I'm just only looking for big fish. Um, and that's the nice thing with smallmouth, where largemouth, like, it's very hard to do that. you either have to get that fish at just the right time, um, or it has to just be a really dumb fish. Because I feel like a largemouth, they don't, like, you usually have to outsmart a largemouth at some way, whether you're trying to figure out where those eggs are on the bed and you're trying to place that bait right there every time, or like you're trying to make them mad. If I'm fishing largemouth, very rarely am I just flipping a bait into the bed. Like, my bait is hitting that fish in the tail 30 to
Yes.
40 flips in a row, and I'm making that fish go like this until I can tell it's really mad, and then I make one perfect flip it right over his nose, it eats, I catch it. That's how I break down. I break down with a largemouth. It's not like flip this bait, flip this bait, flip this bait. It's like two baits, and I make that fish eat. Where with a smallmouth, it's like sometimes you can hit them in the head with a 2 ounce weight and they're just going to look at you. Sometimes you flip anything and it touches the water and they swim up and they eat it before it even starts falling. It's like they're a lot easier on that aspect. But when they don't want to eat, they don't want to eat. Like at Cayuga last year, there was guys sitting on smallmouth beds for over an hour. Like, I know at one point I went down the stretch where all my beds are. There was a person on every single one. And an hour later, 4 of the 5 people were still sitting on the same beds. And it's like, it made them so tough to catch. But if you knew what you were doing and you made a progression through your baits, like, they were catchable. But you definitely weren't just going to flip one bait and just flip it and flip it and flip it and flip it and flip it until they eat. Like, that wasn't how they were doing it.
And those were the smallmouth or the largemouth?
Those were the smallmouth.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the smallmouth on that lake, I think we just hit it right where they were just pulling up. And sometimes smallmouth, when they're just pulling up before there's anything on the bed, they get very finicky and they don't eat like first pitch. Because usually you could throw it, if you find a smallmouth on a bed, if you could make a shoe sink, you could sink a shoe onto their bed and they eat it. But for some reason, Cayuga, those fish just did not want. It definitely was some of the pressure. There was a lot of people on those same fish because there wasn't a lot of them up on bed. But yeah, it it was a lot tougher to catch them that tournament.
Dude. And then I like the other thing you said there. I didn't mean to go quite so far down the sight fishing rabbit hole, but I love it. And you were talking about having the waypoints plugged in with the fish size. Dude, when it's with the largemouth, like we were saying earlier, they definitely they can ghost you, but man, when you have the lineup and kind of the game plan in your head, I'm gonna hit, which fish you're gonna hit first in the order, and it works out, and there's not somebody else that's sitting on them. Like, man, when you can, like, the efficiency of it, I think it really appeals to me. Like, where I'm not just, sort of blind hoping. Like, I know there's a fish, or at least there was a day or two ago, that's sitting. I know exactly where it is. I know, depending on, how much time I spent on it, um, potentially I know exactly where I need to put the bait to catch the fish, the angle, all that stuff. And you go right to it. And if you catch it, you move right to the next one. And that's the one time where I feel like on the bank, I can be efficient, like you were talking about earlier with the scope, like offshore, where you can get right really quick. Like when you can get into one of those areas where you've got everything marked, you know exactly where to go. And when they cooperate, it can be really, really fun.
Oh yeah, yeah. And waypoint, like you said, waypoint management on bedding fish is you have to be meticulous with that stuff. I know for years that All American series you could catch the same fish on day one and day two.
Ooh.
So on smallmouth derbs, like, I won multiple tournaments of theirs with, like, I know I won a St. Clair tournament with 8 fish or with 4 fish. I caught 4 fish each day, and then I caught a big one on the main lake both days. So it's like I only need, in a smallmouth tournament when it's like that, you only need 5 fish if they're big fish. Same thing happened on Okoboji one of those years. Like I caught 3 or 4 fish both days because, if the rules allow it, I'm catching them. I know where they are, but my waypoint management like that. And then, opposite, like at Cayuga this year, we had so little fish in this stretch. And, there's 20, 30 people trying to catch all these fish. And there was maybe 20 fish. So it was like I had to make sure to waypoint them caught. Like, I had these 419s. This one got caught. This one didn't. This one didn't. This one did. So I had to make sure that I'm not wasting my time on fish that I've already caught. And at the same time, I need to know that, like I had a couple fish that I caught on day one that didn't make my limit, but it's like I know that there's an 18 1/4 right here if I need that. And I have it saved on my, on my graph that it's like 18 1/4 on a dock post. Like I go in super detail on my waypoints. The other thing I do is on my phone, you can that I'd have that Garmin Active Captain. You can really get in and really, I think on that one you can't write. You can write a bunch on there. It'll show up on your Active Captain app, but it cuts a lot of it off on your actual graph. So like, it only have like 2 words or whatever. But yeah, I use that Active
Gotcha.
Captain app a lot. The other nice thing with that is you're cruising down the shore, you see a fish on a bed, you do this, not reach forward and have somebody see you waypointing on your graph.
You look
Because
like you're
people,
playing on your phone.
yeah, you're just cruising around and you got your phone,
Dude.
you waypoint, good. Where if you stop and you're like looking at, waypointing and writing in stuff, people are like, why did he go from standing up to sitting down to standing back up? Just little things like maybe people aren't doing that, but there's no reason to tell somebody that, oh, wow, he sat down 4 times in that 20-yard stretch. It's like, if there are people around me, I'm definitely, not afraid to jump on my Active Captain app. That waypoint is super good. Like all of my, for Cayuga last year, I didn't find any fish on bed. I found 1 fish on a bed before Friday. I got to the ramp on Friday, started going, and my graph died. And I knew that the only reason why I was there was to mark beds. And I had to have the graph to do that. And I was like, well, I can just do it all on my Active Captain. It's super quick and easy to have those waypoints load. And then I did all that and it was good to go. Everyone was perfect. And I just was able to, to bypass that nightmare of what would have happened if I didn't, where I'm like looking for fish. If you have to look on days when you need those fish to be bitey, like you're just wasting so much time. And I've done that so much in years, like so many times. If I just, oh, I'll go find those fish on beds or I'll go looking for them. Well, that's bed fishing takes time, no matter how you do it. Like, unless you pull up to a smallmouth flat that's got 20 beds, in a row, you're not going to just catch 5 fish off bed real quick. Uh,
Yeah, I
nowhere.
I agree. And it's so many little things like the wind picks up just a little bit and or the sun, cloud pops up for just a second and your visibility gets shot. At least in some lakes, for me, that's I've had some I've had that ruin some days where just a little bit of a weather change and you thought you were just going to go look for them later and it's you just don't find them.
Yeah.
But dude, I have kept you long enough. I really appreciate the time. And I'll kind of give you the last word if you want to plug a sponsor or whatever you want to talk about. The floor is yours.
As for sponsors, I'm Eco Fishing Shop is kind of my only sponsor. They treat me very good. They're a great shop. They're out of the Ozarks. They do, they'll mail kayaks. They'll mail you anything. So they're a great shop. And then just want to say thank you for having me on.
Yeah, man, we'll have to do it again. Yeah, I could talk sight fishing for hours. Thanks.
I can do that also. Yeah, we didn't. Here, I'll give you the juiciest juice to leave you on. So the smallmouth in the summer to fall will fall spawn in the north. So those big males and sometimes the big females will pull up on bed for a day or two. Sometimes around full moon, sometimes around new moon, sometimes just because it's Thursday. But that's how I've gotten the best or gotten the most efficient and the best at smallmouth fishing on beds is if I go to a lake, I spend at least an hour of almost every day that I fish when I'm fun fishing looking for beds any time of the year. You know, I've caught them June, July, August, September. I haven't ever caught them in October, but I've definitely caught a lot of big fish in August and September on bed, fall spawning, and just kind of kicking it up on the beds. But like there are times where I'm literally dropping down straight on top of a fish in 5 foot on a bed in August, and they're eating. Um, it's a
Dude,
really cool deal.
I'm gonna have to get in on that action sometime. But
That's my favorite bite, but that is one that has came to bite me in the butt really bad because those fish don't necessarily stay for very long. Sometimes they're 2 to 3 days, sometimes they're a day, sometimes they're a couple hours, sometimes they just I think some of the lakes I fish, I think that they just live up in those beds too, like a structure. Some of these
ah,
northern Wisconsin lakes where they're on Cisco beds, where the Ciscos will spawn the same time, and these Ciscos will spawn in these like craters. They're like this deep,
whoa,
about they're like 8 to 10 feet wide sometimes, and like the smallmouth won't be on those beds until the Cisco spawn is over, and then they just move up. And I'm not even sure if it's I think it's the Cisco spawn. I know there's a late Cisco spawn, but it might be just a sucker actually. But these suckers or Ciscos, yeah, they'll bed and they'll spawn like 20 or 30 of these fish will just be up in this big bed thing, just rolling around, and then in July, there's a 5 pound smallmouth that's been sitting on that in that crater of the bed for 2 weeks. But
dude.
they're very, very hard to catch, but you can catch them every once in a while. Those ones aren't necessarily like those false spawners. Those are the biggest females that I come across are like sitting in those deep, really weird beds that you really don't find a lot of other places in the country. They're situational to some of those parts in the north.
Dude, that's a reason to get up north
Oh yeah.
to see cool stuff like that. Well, dude, thank you again, and we'll have to run this back.
Yep. Anytime. Anytime.
Jordan Westerman, ladies and gentlemen. That was fun. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. Definitely planned on talking pre-spawn, and then once we got started on that sight fishing stuff, I could not help myself. Just had to keep going. Um, I love sight fishing, love talking sight fishing, so it was cool to do that as kind of a bonus. Um, we got a couple segments to finish here, so let's do yakking on a budget first. And this is we'll call this a quasi budget tip. It's almost more of a random fishing tip, but the tip is going to be blades. Hopefully, you guys can see these. Um, for the folks that are tuned into the audio, I'm holding up spinnerbait blades, a 3.5 and a 4. These are the two that I brought as an example. Um, and I'll show you the spinnerbait here that I've got. These are Booyah Covert Finesse spinnerbaits. They're both double Colorado. They're both half ounce, and one has the 4, one has the 3.5. And you wouldn't think that half size difference would be all that significant, um, but it makes a difference. I was actually fishing these today, and I had rigged up a couple different ones, and I had one kind of a ultra finesse on that little 3.5 inch blade, a 3.5, or sorry, I think it's a 3 inch kicker and a 3.5 inch main blade there, and the water was dirtier than I thought it was going to be. I wanted to get the bait a little bit deeper. Water's still fairly cold, so that smaller blade I thought would let me get it deeper. But then I was not getting bites with that lighter blade, so I switched to the 4. Um, that one specifically, you can see it's been tied on, and it completely changed it. That bigger blade, more feel. You can feel that thump better, and then it makes the bait lift a little bit, so it's not getting quite as deep. But basically, the same exact same spinner bait, just modifying the blades on there a little bit, completely changed it. And this actually came from the factory, I guess, came standard with an Oklahoma blade on it. So I switched it up. I've got some with both, but the cool thing about these spinner baits and blades is I could just take one. You buy a couple of different size blades. You can take one spinner bait, and I can fish it differently. I'm able to vary the speeds, um, vary the depth that I'm working the bait just by and how hard it's thumping, just by modifying those blades. Just have a good pair of split ring pliers with you, so that you could actually change those out on the water. But that's something I like to do. Always like to tinker and experiment. And spinnerbait blades are a fairly inexpensive way to do that, and basically completely change what you're able to do with that spinnerbait. So that is our yakking on a budget tip for this week. Now let's see the part of the show where I always struggle the most, where I go to share screen. Let's see if I can do it quicker than usual. There we go. Share. All right. So before we get into our final segment, I wanted to shout out Sniper Marine. We talked a little live scope fishing here, um, in our pre-spawn segment before we got into the spawn fishing. Um, if you are interested in getting into forward facing from a kayak, Sniper Marine can help you. They are a partner of the show. I've actually got their main website, and then they have a kayak zone tab that you can click on. Um, Now they sell poles and mounts to let you use forward facing on your kayak, and you can actually go in this kayak zone and see different anglers how they have outfitted their kayaks. So I see some Hobies, I see an Old Town. So if you're looking for an idea of how you might set up your kayak, Sniper Marine can help you there, as well as with the actual purchase of the poles and mounts. So if you want to get into forward facing from a kayak, check out Sniper Marine. And now we can stop the share. Cool. And let's see, what do we got? Final segment is going to be Kings of the Week. And I found a couple of local tournaments. We're into March, and weather is starting to break, at least in where I'm at. I know there's some guys who are, I don't want to say spoiled, but yeah, I'll say it, spoiled down in Texas, further south down in Florida. Um, they have had nice warm water for a while. We're getting there. Things are starting to heat up. Guys are able to get out in the water, catch some fish, and the local tournament scenes. Well, they're starting to get busy. This is the time of year to catch some of those biggest bass of the year. So I'm going to shout out our first angler. Fishes the Carolina Kayak Anglers events, and he did the tournament this past weekend on Lake Tillery. So our first king of the week, Brian Siokas. Hopefully I am pronouncing your name right, Brian. But Brian put up an 86.25-inch limit on Lake Tillery to take home the W. He is our first king of the week. And our second king of the week, changing regions. We're going from North Carolina to Texas. The Texas Bass Nation Kayak Series. They had an event on Lake Dunlap. And Matthew Murphy put up 81.5 inches, and also put up the big fish. And he takes home the win. So Matthew is our second king of the week. Congrats to Brian and Matthew, our kings of the week. And I think that's all I got. So again, hopefully everybody enjoyed the pre-spawn slash spawn show as much as I did. And yeah, fishing is getting good. I am pumped. I am happy that I got a chance to fish today. I might get a chance later this week to get out, and I think the weather's going to be even better. So I am pumped. Um, it is my favorite time of the year. So we'll be back next week. Be sure to tune in for some more kayak fishing conversation. And until then, remember to take a kid fishing.